It began on a cold January morning in 1985. An unsolved mystery. A husband returning to an empty house and a note that would haunt his family for 17 years. "We've got your wife." No ransom demand, no clue, just footprints in the snow leading nowhere, and Denise Bolser gone from Raymond, New Hampshire. She was 24 years old, a bookkeeper recently separated from her husband, known for loyalty to her family, and suddenly, poof, vanished. This wasn't a high-profile case. No Amber Alerts existed yet, no digital forensics, no social media frenzy. Police found her husband's pickup truck abandoned at Boston's Logan Airport days later, with her social security card, birth certificate, and credit cards carefully placed on the front seat. In a single moment, Denise had erased her identity, or someone had. Her family never gave up. Her parents, who lived nearby, prayed she was alive. A retired trooper who knew her mother from high school took the case personally. Posters faded, news interest died, but hope stayed lit in living rooms and whispered prayers. Meanwhile, accusations of embezzlement followed her disappearance. Her employer alleged she'd stolen thousands, leading to charges filed in absentia. It fueled speculation that she ran or hid. But those accusations were later dropped. No one knew whether Denise disappeared in fear or in escape. Years passed. Investigators collected leads. The case made its way into a missing person database, but no solid matches ever came. Then, in early 2002, a private investigator named Shirley Casey stumbled upon an entry. A woman living in Panama City, Florida, named Denise James, born around the same time, same state. In May of that year, authorities quietly knocked on her door. She answered, first confused, then stunned. For 17 years, she had lived under another name, married, built a family unaware of her past. When detectives confirmed her identity, she broke down. The woman once missing was alive. Denise later explained she had fled after her boss threatened her life over an accounting dispute, hinting she'd be dead in 2 days. She said she traveled through South Carolina, California, the Bahamas, Hawaii, and ultimately settled in Florida, believing she'd never be safe unless she disappeared. She wasn't kidnapped. She had run, but not from her life, from a threat she believed would kill her. Still, she told her family she loved them and regretted the pain she'd caused. The reunion was raw. A daughter, now 42, walked into her parents' arms, looking older, changed, torn. She wasn't the Denise who left in 1985, but she was Denise nonetheless. And for the family who never forgot, tears were the closest thing to justice. This is not just a case of someone missing and found. It's a portrait of fear, survival, identity displacement, and the power of unrelenting hope to close a door left open for decades. Denise Bolser was alive, but alive didn't mean untouched. When she opened that door in Panama City, Florida, in May 2002, to face the investigators who had tracked her down, she wasn't the frightened young woman who had vanished in New Hampshire 17 years earlier. She was older now, quieter, almost ghost-like in how she carried herself. Her eyes didn't avoid contact, but they did carry weight. Denise James, as she called herself, had lived an entire lifetime under a name she'd chosen not to protect a secret, but to survive a reality she believed was hunting her. It turned out her story wasn't just one of disappearance, it was reinvention. After fleeing in 1985, she'd spent months in fear, moving from place to place, sleeping in motels, using cash-only transactions, watching over her shoulder at every gas station and every rest stop. There was no blueprint. She didn't know how to vanish the right way. She just knew she had to stay ahead of whatever or whoever was threatening her. Denise had believed her former employer was dangerous. She told investigators that the man she once worked for had warned her explicitly that she'd be dead within 48 hours if she didn't cooperate over financial discrepancies. She said she didn't fully understand. She panicked. She didn't go to the police. She didn't even call her family. She simply packed, walked out of her life, and became someone else. To her, that decision wasn't about abandoning, it was about surviving. By 1986, she had settled in the South. Panama City was quiet then, touristy but easy to disappear into. She worked low-profile jobs, avoided anything that required a background check, and eventually married a man who never once suspected the woman he knew as Denise James had a different past. They had a modest life. No lavish spending, no signs of a woman hiding from the law. Just simple routines. Groceries, church, weekend drives. She was careful. Never too friendly, never too visible. What kept her from reaching out to her family all those years? That question hung in the air during the initial interviews. Her answer was heavy and honest. Shame. She feared that even if the threat against her was no longer real, the damage she'd caused by vanishing would be impossible to repair. So she stayed away. Year after year, the guilt grew heavier, until it hardened into silence. But even as she tried to disappear, someone had never stopped watching. A private investigator named Shirley Casey, hired to revisit cold cases, had been scanning missing person registries and DMV photos when she found a match. It was subtle. The face looked older, but something in the eyes hadn't changed. When investigators finally confirmed her identity through public records, everything aligned. A fingerprint check sealed it. It was her. Her family. They were stunned. Her mother wept uncontrollably when police called her with the news. For years, she had imagined the worst, her daughter buried in some unmarked grave, or trafficked, or murdered by someone who never left a trace. And now, suddenly, she was alive, and just a few states away. Denise's father, who'd aged dramatically since her disappearance, reportedly said he couldn't believe she had survived this long, but he never gave up hope. He just wanted to see her again, before his time was up. The reunion wasn't like in the movies. There was no emotional music or sprinting into each other's arms. It was hesitant, quiet, raw. Denise hugged her mother first, long and tight. They cried. They didn't speak much that day. There was too much to say. But in that hug, something broken began to mend. Her father just looked at her, tears in his eyes, as if trying to memorize her all over again. Denise didn't face any charges. The embezzlement allegations were long dropped. No foul play had ever been confirmed. In the end, her story wasn't about crime. It was about fear, about what a person might do when they feel trapped, alone, and uncertain who to trust. But here's the haunting part. Denise never fully explained what happened with her employer. Was there really a threat? Was it imagined, exaggerated, or real, but undocumented? That remains unclear. The man she feared was never charged with anything related to her disappearance. Some believed she ran from guilt, others from danger. Denise insisted it was the latter. Whatever the truth, it left a scar on every life she touched. In the eyes of the law, the case was over. But for Denise, life after being found was a new challenge. She had to reckon with two identities, the girl who vanished and the woman who came back. And not everyone in her life could accept both. Denise returned home, but not to celebration, not to parades or welcome signs. She returned to questions from neighbors, from friends, from reporters, from her own family. Some relatives embraced her like no time had passed. Others didn't know how. Her brother, who had spent years haunted by her absence, struggled to even look her in the eye at first. He had gone through a hell of his own. False hope, dead-end leads, empty birthdays, anniversaries filled with pain. In his mind, she had been gone far too long without a reason. They sat in silence for a long time before either said a word. "I thought you were dead," he finally said. "I thought I would be," she answered. Those two lines summed up everything they both had carried: fear, heartbreak, confusion. The road back to trust wasn't paved with hugs and forgiveness. It had to be rebuilt one small moment at a time. Her parents, especially her mother, were gentler. Time had aged them. Her mother's hands trembled when she held Denise's face, studying her like she was a ghost that might disappear again if she blinked too long. Denise didn't say much that first week. She cooked meals, washed dishes, sat on the porch like she used to when she was 17, trying to remember who she used to be before the storm hit. But the world she returned to was no longer frozen in 1985. The house she grew up in had changed hands twice before her mother bought it back after retirement. Her childhood bedroom was now a guest room. Her friends had moved on, married, divorced, parents now. Her own name was on old missing posters, yellowed with age. Strangers on the internet were suddenly talking about her life like it was a Netflix series. They debated whether she was a victim or a fraud. Some accused her of lying. Others called her brave. She avoided them all. Denise rarely left the house in those first few weeks. The press hounded her doorstep. Headlines called her the woman who hid for 17 years. But to her, she hadn't been hiding. She had been surviving in the only way she knew how. The truth wasn't black or white. It was messy, painful, and laced with trauma that didn't show on the outside. One morning, weeks after her return, she sat alone with a cup of coffee and an old photograph, one that showed her at 22, laughing beside her father on a fishing trip. She hadn't remembered it being taken, but now, staring at it, she broke. Not just tears, but body-shaking sobs that had waited nearly 2 decades to escape. For the life she lost, the choices she made, the birthdays missed, the years erased, and most of all, for the guilt that no amount of time could clean. Therapy became a quiet lifeline, a place where she could speak without judgment. Her counselor helped her peel back the layers. The panic she felt in 1985, the fear that paralyzed her, the shame that snowballed each year. Denise didn't claim to be a hero. She didn't ask for sympathy. She just wanted to be understood. And slowly, piece by piece, she began to rebuild. She volunteered at a women's shelter under a pseudonym. She didn't share her story, but she listened to theirs. Women who ran from abuse, girls who had nowhere to go. She finally saw herself in them, not as a criminal, but as a scared young woman who had felt cornered by forces bigger than herself. She wasn't trying to erase the past, just make peace with it. Her family didn't always understand her silence or her decisions, but they began to understand her pain. Over dinners and long drives, she told them stories from her life in hiding. Jobs she worked, towns she lived in, how she once got the flu in Alabama and had to lie about her identity to a pharmacist. The time her new husband nearly discovered a news clipping she kept hidden in a box beneath their bed. The sleepless nights spent watching shadows pass her window, afraid someone had finally found her. They learned that surviving isn't always heroic. Sometimes it's just not dying. By late 2003, a year after her return, Denise Bolser had changed again. Not into who she once was, but into someone completely new. Not the teenager who vanished, not the fugitive who stayed silent, but a woman who finally stood in the sunlight of her truth. She never became famous. She didn't want to be. She turned down book deals, declined TV interviews. Even when major networks begged her to sit for a 1-hour exclusive, she refused. "I didn't disappear to be famous. I came back to be free." But freedom wasn't as simple as stepping out of the shadows. It had to be earned. Quietly, painfully, day by day. She reconnected with her son, slowly. He had been just a boy when she vanished. Now, a grown man, hardened by abandonment. He had every right to shut her out, but he didn't. They walked through the awkwardness, the distance, the tears, and somewhere along the way, they began calling each other family again. She also came clean with the man she married under a false name during her years in hiding. They divorced before she resurfaced, but he deserved the truth, the real one, and she gave it to him, every jagged piece. Today, Denise Bolser lives quietly in New England. She works at a community kitchen under her real name. No makeup, no disguise, just her. She doesn't run anymore. Sometimes, young women at the shelter recognize her from old news reports. They ask what it was like to vanish, to live behind a mask for 17 years, to be afraid every day that someone might knock on your door and take everything away. Denise doesn't give speeches. She just nods and says softly, "You never really stop being afraid, but eventually you learn how to breathe through it." Her story may not be wrapped in a perfect bow, but it's real, raw, human, and maybe that's why it matters, because for every Denise out there still hiding, physically or emotionally, this story is a reminder. Sometimes survival doesn't look like fighting. Sometimes it looks like disappearing and having the strength to come back. And if this story moved you even a little, don't just scroll past. There are so many more untold stories like Denise Bolser's, stories of people lost, found and caught in the gray space between. So subscribe for deeper true crime cases, hit the like button if you believe in second chances, and share this story to remind someone out there it's never too late to come home.